Hey guys, tonight we're heading to Yakutia, officially the Saka Republic, where winter doesn't just arrive, it occupies. Picture this. You're standing outside a wooden barn at 6 a.m., and the thermometer reads minus 71 degrees Celsius. That's minus 95.8 degrees Fahrenheit for my American friends still clinging to Fahrenheit. Your eyelashes have already frozen together. The moisture in your nostrils has crystallized into tiny ice daggers. You exhale, and your breath doesn't just fog. It literally falls to the ground as ice crystals with an audible tinkle. Inside that barn behind you, 12 horses, 8 cattle, and a shifting population of chickens are depending on you to keep them alive through the next 16 hours of darkness. No pressure. This is Oymyakon and the surrounding Yakutian settlements, the coldest permanently inhabited places on Earth, where the ground stays frozen down to 1,500 meters and warm means you can feel your toes. Spoiler alert. You probably won't survive this without generations of inherited knowledge, and even then, you'll lose a few fingertips to frostbite before you figure out which metal tools you can actually touch with bare skin. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is there. I love seeing this global community gather for these weird historical deep dives. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You've just inherited your grandfather's farm on the outskirts of a village whose name has 17 syllables you haven't mastered yet. It's late November, which in Yakutia means the real winter is starting. Those adorable minus 25 degrees Celsius autumn days are behind you now. Your grandfather, before he passed last spring, kept 23 animals alive through 40 winters in the barn you're now staring at. The structure looks almost comically inadequate. Rough-hewn logs, a roof that sags in the middle, gaps between planks you could slide a pencil through. City U would call it a fire hazard and a building code nightmare. Yakutian U is about to learn it's a masterpiece of thermal engineering that predates thermodynamics as a formal science. The animals are watching you through the barn's small windows. You can see the vapor clouds of their collective breath backlit by the single kerosene lamp inside. Horses' eyes reflect gold in the dim light. They're not the sleek thoroughbreds you've seen in movies. These Yakutian horses are compact. Shaggy beings that look like they're wearing enormous fur coats over fur coats. Their manes hang thick and wild. In summer, they apparently look almost normal-sized, but right now in November, they've expanded to roughly 1.3 times their warm weather volume, all insulation and survival adaptation. One of them, you think her name is Kaitalik, which means swallow in Saka, snorts, and the sound carries that peculiar flat quality of extreme cold, where even noise seems to freeze mid-air. You're wearing 5 layers, starting from your skin, thermal underwear your aunt mailed from Yakutsk, a wool shirt, a thick sweater, a down vest, and finally the duka, a traditional reindeer fur coat that weighs approximately 14 kilograms and makes you walk like a padded refrigerator. On your feet, 3 pairs of socks inside unti, those knee-high boots made from reindeer leg skin with the fur facing inward. Your hands are in double mittens, thin inner gloves made from rabbit fur, thick outer mittens of deer hide. On your head, a shanka hat with ear flaps tied firmly under your chin. You look absurd. You also might survive the next 10 minutes outside. The barn door doesn't swing open. Nothing swings at minus 71 degrees Celsius because oil-based lubricants turn into something with the consistency of peanut butter, and metal contracts enough to jam mechanisms that worked fine in September. You have to lift the entire door on its leather hinges and walk it sideways like a dance partner. Your grandfather's note, translated from Saka, said, "Never force cold metal. Always lift and slide." You're beginning to understand that every single instruction he left is a compressed survival manual earned through mistakes you desperately want to avoid repeating. Inside, the temperature is a balmy minus 15 degrees Celsius. This 36-degree difference is everything. This is the margin between life and death for the animals, the thin atmospheric cushion your great-great-great-grandparents figured out how to create using nothing but logs, moss, dried grass, and strategic animal placement. The science is actually fascinating. The animals themselves are the primary heat source. A single horse at rest generates about 1,000 watts of heat, roughly equivalent to 10 incandescent light bulbs. Multiply that by 12 horses, add 8 cattle who produce even more, factor in the chickens' collective tiny furnace up in the rafters, and you've got a biological heating system pumping out around 25,000 watts continuously. But here's where it gets clever. The barn is deliberately undersized for the number of animals. They're packed just tightly enough that their combined body heat can't escape faster than they generate it. The walls are double-layered logs with a 15-centimeter gap filled with dried moss and meadow grass, materials your ancestors harvested in July specifically for this purpose. The moss isn't just filler. It's a superior insulator that remains effective even when frozen solid, unlike modern fiberglass insulation, which loses R value in extreme cold. Historians still argue whether the ancient Yakutians understood the physics of thermal mass and insulation coefficients or simply iterated through trial and error over centuries. But the result is the same. A barn that functions as a giant thermos bottle with breathing animals as the hot liquid inside. You move through the space, and every animal turns to track your movement. There's an intelligence in their eyes that's unnerving until you realize. They know you're the rookie. Your grandfather had a rhythm, a pattern they understood. You're a disruption, a variable. The lead mare, Kaitalik, takes 2 steps toward you, and you notice she's not limping exactly, but favoring her left rear leg. Great. Your first day, and you've already got a potential medical situation in conditions where a veterinarian would need to travel 4 hours by specially equipped truck. Assuming the truck starts, which in minus 71 degrees Celsius is a genuine coin flip even with engine block heaters. The cattle are Yakutian breed too, smaller than Western dairy cows, with coats so thick they look like they're wearing shag carpets. One of them, a female your grandfather's notes call Tiara, is pregnant, due in February, which is somehow even colder than now. You try not to think about delivering a calf in minus 80 degrees Celsius conditions. The chickens in the elevated coop are huddled together in a mass that looks like a single breathing feather pillow. They're technically producing eggs even now, though producing is generous. You'll get maybe 1 egg per week from the whole flock, and it'll freeze solid within 90 seconds of leaving the hen if you don't immediately pocket it against your body. Your grandfather's daily log is written in a mixture of Saka and Russian in a notebook kept in a leather pouch hanging from a central beam. Today's entry, his last, from March, reads, Spring coming. Tiara restless. Fixed east wall gap with moss bundle. Kaitalik needs hoof check. Simple observations that contain worlds of knowledge you're now responsible for decoding. What makes Tiara restless? Is restlessness normal or concerning? How do you check a horse's hoof when removing your mittens for more than 60 seconds can give you frostbite? The smell of the barn is its own entity, not unpleasant exactly, but thick and organic. Hay, animal musk, the slight ammonia tang of manure, and something else you can't quite identify that you'll later learn is the scent of fermented feed. The animals eat differently here than anywhere else on Earth. You can't just toss them regular hay when their bodies are burning calories at emergency rates to maintain core temperature. They need concentrated nutrition, fat-rich supplements, and specially prepared feeds that sound like medieval alchemy recipes. Your grandmother, still alive, still fierce, living in the main house 30 meters away, has promised to teach you, but her opening statement was, "If you kill my son's animals through stupidity, I will be disappointed." In Yakutian grandmother terms, this is roughly equivalent to a death threat. You check the water situation, and here's another piece of insanity. The animals need liquid water, but water freezes almost instantly at these temperatures. Your grandfather's solution is a constant tending system involving a barrel brought in from outside, where snow is cleaner than the barn floor, placed near the center of the barn where animal heat keeps it barely liquid, and checked every 3 hours day and night. 3 hours, which means you're not sleeping more than 2.5-hour stretches for the next 4 months. Coffee, you think, is going to become a major food group. One of the younger horses, a 2-year-old your notes call Sardana, is trying to eat another horse's tail. This, you will learn, is both normal and a sign you need to supplement their minerals. Animals get weird cravings in extreme cold, and tail chewing is the equine equivalent of craving pickles. You'll need to add salt blocks and possibly bone meal to their feeding stations. But tonight, your first night, you're just observing, just trying to memorize which animal is which, just attempting to understand the ecosystem of this crowded, warmish, utterly foreign barn. Outside, the stars are doing that thing they do in extreme cold. Not twinkling but burning steady and bright, so many of them visible that the Milky Way looks like someone spilled milk across black velvet. There's no moon tonight, but you don't need one. The snow reflects starlight with enough intensity to read by, and the aurora... Oh, the aurora is starting to wake up on the northern horizon. A green shimmer that will build over the next hour into curtains of light that ancient Yakutians believed were spirits of animals and ancestors dancing together. You stand in the barn doorway, half in and half out, and you understand with sudden clarity. This isn't just farming. This is a partnership negotiated daily between human ingenuity and animal biology, both pressed to their absolute limits by an environment that actively wants everything dead. Every animal in this barn is here because their ancestors survived, because your ancestors figured out the 1,000 small tricks that add up to survival, because someone generations ago refused to abandon this frozen land and instead learned to thrive in it. Kaitalik snorts again, softer this time, and you take it as approval. Or maybe she's just commenting on how you're letting cold air in. Hard to say. You slide the door closed, sealing the barn's warmth inside, and head toward the house where grandmother is waiting with fermented mare's milk and a lecture on everything you're doing wrong. Tomorrow, the real work begins. The barn your grandfather built didn't start with a blueprint or a permit from some distant government office. It started 43 years ago with a choice of trees. Specifically, larch trees, Larix gmellinii if you want the Latin, growing in a valley 15 kilometers from where the barn now stands. Your grandmother tells you this story on your second morning while you're still trying to figure out how to drink tea without your mustache freezing to the cup rim. He walked for 3 days looking at trees, she says in Russian, because your Saka is still embarrassingly rudimentary. Not the biggest trees, not the straightest, the right trees. The right trees, you learn, are larch that grew slowly in poor soil, creating dense wood with tight growth rings. Fast-growing larch from rich riverside soil is actually inferior for construction here. It contains more moisture, contracts more dramatically in cold, and splits more easily when temperatures swing. Your grandfather needed wood that had already spent decades adapting to extreme cold, wood that understood this climate at a cellular level. It's a detail you'd never find in modern construction manuals, but it's the difference between a barn that lasts 40 years and one that fails in the first serious cold snap. Larch has another quirky property that makes it perfect for Yakutian construction. It doesn't rot. Something about the resin composition and density makes it essentially immune to decay, even when exposed to moisture. There are Yakutian structures over 300 years old still standing, the logs barely weathered. This matters because you can't exactly run to a lumber yard for replacement boards when you're 500 kilometers from the nearest hardware store, and the delivery truck won't start below minus 50 degrees Celsius. Your barn needs to last, and larch ensures it will outlive you, your children, and possibly your grandchildren if properly maintained. The foundation is where things get properly weird. You can't dig a basement or pour concrete footings when the ground is permanently frozen to depths that would make a geologist weep. Instead, the barn sits on a system of vertical larch posts sunk into the permafrost at strategic points, with horizontal beams creating a raised floor about 40 centimeters above the actual ground. This air gap is crucial. It prevents the barn's heat from thawing the permafrost beneath it, which would cause the entire structure to sink and twist like a ship going down in slow motion. Every few years, you'll need to check these posts and adjust them as the permafrost shifts, because permafrost, despite the perma part, moves and settles in ways that keep geologists employed. The walls themselves are a marvel of simple engineering. Each log is hand-hewn to create flat surfaces on two sides, top and bottom, where they'll stack against each other. But here's the trick. They're not cut to perfect uniformity. Each log is slightly different, and your grandfather fitted them together like a three-dimensional jigsaw puzzle, selecting each piece for how it would nestle against its neighbors. The gaps between logs are chinked with moss, not just stuffed in randomly, but packed tight using a wooden tool that looks like a flat chisel. In summer, this moss is slightly pliable. In winter, it freezes into an insulating barrier that's actually more effective than modern spray foam. Between the inner and outer log walls runs that 15-centimeter gap your grandmother calls the thermal buffer. This gap contains layers. First, dried moss pressed tight, then a layer of meadow grass harvested at a specific growth stage. Too early and it's too moist, too late and it's too brittle. Then more moss. Then, oddly, a layer of dried animal dung mixed with clay. You think this is funny? Your grandmother asks when you can't suppress a smile. This dung clay layer has saved more animals than your modern veterinary medicine. She's not entirely wrong. The mixture creates an almost airtight seal that blocks wind infiltration, while the organic components continue to insulate even at temperatures where mineral insulation fails. The roof is perhaps the most critical element, and it's here that ancient Yakutian engineering reveals its sophistication. The roof isn't flat or even a simple pitch design. It's a double-layered system with a steep outer roof and a shallower inner ceiling, creating an attic space that serves multiple functions. First, it's where the chickens roost, benefiting from the absolute warmest zone of the barn while their body heat contributes to the overall thermal envelope. Second, it's an additional insulation layer. Cold air is denser than warm air, so the warmest air generated by the animals below naturally rises into this attic space, where it's trapped by the roof's insulation and slowly radiates back down, rather than escaping into the minus 71 degrees Celsius night. The roof's outer layer is birch bark, harvested in strips, overlapped like scales, and weighted down with small logs. Birch bark is waterproof, flexible even when frozen, and lasts decades without treatment. Over the bark goes a layer of sod, actual grass and soil now frozen solid, which adds thermal mass and additional insulation. In summer, this sod literally grows, creating a living roof that's legitimately beautiful. In winter, it's a frozen shield that can hold a meter of snow without collapsing. The weight calculations for this system were done through generations of trial and error, and historians still argue whether the ancient Yakutians consciously understood structural load distribution or simply built roofs until they found ones that didn't cave in. Ventilation is where the design gets counterintuitive. You'd think in minus 71 degrees Celsius, you'd seal every possible gap to prevent heat loss. Wrong. Seal a barn completely, and the animal's breathing creates humidity that condenses on every cold surface, forming ice that eventually entombs the whole interior in a frozen shell. Your grandfather's barn has ventilation gaps precisely placed near the roof peak, small openings that allow the moistest air to escape while retaining heat. The openings are covered with loose boards that can be adjusted depending on temperature and animal count. Too much ventilation and you lose heat. Too little and you gain ice. Finding the balance is an art form your grandmother says takes 3 winters to learn and a lifetime to master. The door is its own engineering challenge. Remember how you had to lift and slide it rather than swing it? That's because it's mounted on leather hinges that remain flexible at extreme temperatures, unlike metal hinges which contract, freeze, and eventually shatter. The door itself is triple layered. Outer boards, moss insulation, inner boards, creating a 40-centimeter thick barrier that weighs enough to require genuine effort to move. But here's the clever part. The door is slightly smaller than the door frame, with the gap packed with a loose roll of reindeer hide that can be stuffed into place from inside. This allows you to open the door from outside but prevents cold air from rushing in when the door is closed. The windows are deliberately tiny, maybe 30 centimeters square, because glass is a thermal disaster in extreme cold. But animals need some light for circadian rhythm regulation, and you need to see inside without constantly opening the door. Your grandfather's solution: quadruple pane windows made by setting 4 pieces of salvaged glass into a wooden frame with air gaps between each pane. The innermost pane stays relatively warm. The outermost pane matches the outside temperature. The 2 middle panes create gradient zones that minimize thermal shock and reduce ice crystal formation. It's basically a primitive version of modern triple pane windows, invented by necessity decades before they became commercial products. Inside, the layout follows principles you're only beginning to appreciate. The horses occupy the north side, the coldest exposure, because they're the most cold-hardy and generate the most heat. The cattle are on the south side, where they receive any solar gain from the afternoon sun through those tiny windows. The chickens are above in the warmest zone. But it's not random placement. Your grandfather mapped out where each animal should stand based on their individual heat production, cold tolerance, and social hierarchy. Kaidelik, the lead mare, has the spot closest to the center where the water barrel sits. The youngest horse is sheltered between 2 older horses. Even among the cattle, there's a logic to their arrangement that becomes apparent once you understand each animal's personality and needs. The floor is simply packed earth that's frozen solid from October through April. In summer, it thaws to mud, which is apparently a whole different nightmare you'll deal with when the time comes. But frozen, it's perfect. Solid enough to walk on, insulated by the air gap beneath the barn, and naturally absorbent for animal waste. Manure freezes almost immediately when it hits the floor, which sounds gross but is actually sanitary. Frozen manure doesn't smell, doesn't decompose, doesn't harbor bacteria. You'll shovel it out weekly in frozen chunks, stack it outside, and in spring it becomes fertilizer for the vegetable garden. Circle of Life, Yakutian edition. The central post holding up the main roof beam is more than structural, it's psychological. Animals tend to orient themselves around it, creating a natural circulation pattern where they move clockwise throughout the day, seeking optimal warmth and position. Your grandfather carved symbols into this post. Marks for each year, small pictographs of animals born in the barn, a few words in Saka that your grandmother translates as, "May all who stand here stand strong." It's sentimental, sure, but there's something grounding about knowing 43 winters of animals have circled this post, and now you're responsible for continuing that unbroken chain. Your grandmother takes you outside to examine the exterior, and you notice things you missed before. The logs are darkened with age but show no signs of rot or significant weathering. Snow has drifted against the south side, and she points out how this is actually beneficial. The snow acts as additional insulation, and the barn's design deliberately encourages drifting on certain sides. On the north side, the wind-facing side, the logs are clear of snow, and you can see where your grandfather applied a coating of pine tar mixed with ash, a natural preservative and wind barrier that needs reapplication every few years. The entire structure is held together with wooden pegs and minimal metal, a dozen handmade nails at critical joints, but most connections are mortise and tenon or simple notches. Metal becomes brittle at these temperatures. Wood flexes and adapts. You can actually hear the barn settling and adjusting as the temperature drops each evening. A series of creaks and pops that sound alarming until your grandmother explains it's normal. The barn breathes, she says, which sounds mystical but is literally true. The wood expands and contracts. The moss compresses and relaxes. The whole structure is in constant subtle motion, adapting to conditions. There's a peculiar detail you notice. A small wooden box attached to the east wall, about head height. Your grandmother sees you looking and smiles. The first genuine smile you've seen from her. "Open it," she says. Inside is a collection of items. A horseshoe, a bundle of dried herbs, a carved wooden figure of a horse, and a piece of paper with writing you can't read. Every barn has its spirit keeper, she explains. Not religion exactly, but respect. Recognition that we work with forces larger than ourselves. She doesn't elaborate and you don't push, but you notice she touches the box gently before you head back inside. The engineering of this barn represents something modern construction has largely forgotten. The integration of thermal dynamics, structural integrity, material science, and practical usability without the benefit of computer modeling, engineered lumber, or standardized building codes. Your grandfather built this using knowledge passed down through oral tradition, personal observation, and the hard teacher of trial and error. Every choice was made with intention. The tree selection, the log fitting, the moss packing, the ventilation gaps, the animal placement. It's not quaint folk architecture. It's sophisticated environmental engineering developed over centuries by people whose survival absolutely depended on getting it right. As you stand in the barn that second evening, checking each animal, adjusting their hay, breaking ice from the water barrel rim, you're starting to understand that learning to keep animals alive isn't really about the animals. It's about learning to read this structure, to understand its moods and needs, to maintain the delicate systems your grandfather built. The barn is as alive as the animals inside it, and it requires just as much attention, just as much care, just as much respect. Kaidalik nuzzles your shoulder as you pass, and you take it as endorsement. Or maybe she's just hoping for extra grain. With horses, it's always hard to tell. Your phone alarm sounds at 3:47 a.m., which is offensive on multiple levels, primarily because you only fell asleep at 1:30 a.m. after the midnight barn check. The ringtone, some cheerful marimba nonsense, sounds obscene in the absolute darkness of a Yakutian December morning. You silence it and lie there for 30 seconds, contemplating your life choices before the real alarm goes off. Your grandmother banging on your bedroom wall with what sounds like a wooden spoon. Animals don't wait for lazy grandsons, she shouts in Saka, which you understand perfectly because tone transcends language barriers. The temperature inside your bedroom is -8 degrees Celsius. This is considered comfortable sleeping temperature here, achieved by shutting off the wood stove around 11 p.m. and letting the house slowly radiate heat through the night. You've learned to sleep in thermal underwear, wool socks, and a hat because anything exposed to air will be painfully cold by morning. Getting dressed is an archaeological excavation through layers you laid out the night before in strategic order. Base layer, wool layer, insulated layer, outer layer, each one feeling like you're adding armor for battle, which honestly you are. The main house kitchen is warmer, maybe 15 degrees Celsius, because your grandmother has already restarted the stove. She's at the counter preparing something that steams in the lamplight. The electricity is out again, which happens when temperatures drop below -65 degrees Celsius because the above-ground power lines contract and sometimes snap. This is why every house has kerosene lamps as backup, not decoration. Your grandmother has tea ready, strong black tea with milk and a disturbing amount of salt. "Drink," she commands. "You need electrolytes." It tastes like someone melted a bouillon cube in Earl Grey, but it's hot and your body craves the sodium, so you drink. She's also prepared salamat, a traditional breakfast that's basically fried flour mixed with butter and sour cream. It looks like grainy beige paste and tastes like concentrated calories, which is exactly what it is. Each bowl contains roughly 800 calories of pure survival fuel. You eat mechanically, knowing you'll burn through this in the next 3 hours. Your grandmother eats standing up, already dressed for outside, watching you with evaluating eyes. "Today I teach you morning routine," she says. "You will make mistakes. Try not to kill anything." The walk from house to barn is 30 meters that feels like 300. You step outside and the cold hits like a physical wall, stealing breath from your lungs. The air is so cold it has texture. You can feel it pressing against any exposed skin, seeking heat to steal. Your nose hairs freeze instantly with a peculiar tickling sensation. Each breath must be carefully managed. Breathe through your nose to warm the air slightly. Breathe out through your mouth to prevent ice buildup in your nostrils. Never breathe too deeply or the cold will sear your lungs. There's a whole respiratory choreography you're still learning. The snow under your boots doesn't crunch. It squeaks, each step producing a high-pitched squeal that sounds like styrofoam being compressed. This only happens below -50 degrees Celsius when snow crystals become so frozen they're essentially tiny glass structures scraping against each other. In the darkness, with only a headlamp and the barn's faint light ahead, the squeaking footsteps are your primary navigation feedback. Stars overhead are so bright they cast actual shadows, and the aurora is still dancing, now a pale blue-green curtain that ripples like underwater silk. Your grandmother reaches the barn first and waits while you perform the door-opening ritual. Lift, slide, don't pull, don't rush. Inside, the animals are already awake, restless, knowing food is coming. The temperature reads -12 degrees Celsius on the thermometer nailed to the center post. This means the animals burn significant energy overnight maintaining the barn's warmth, and they're hungry in a way that goes beyond normal appetite. Winter feeding isn't about satisfaction. It's about fuel replenishment. First, water check, your grandmother says, moving to the central barrel. A skim of ice has formed on top overnight, about 2 centimeters thick. She produces a metal ladle with a wooden handle. Metal handle would freeze to your skin instantly if you touched it, and breaks through the ice, scooping it out in chunks. Every morning, break ice, remove, check water level. If barrel is less than half, bring snow from outside. She demonstrates checking the water level using a measuring stick notched at specific intervals. The cattle need approximately 50 liters per day combined. Horses need 40 liters. Chickens need surprisingly little, but their water must be warmer or they won't drink. You take over the ice breaking, and it's harder than it looks. The ice is dense, frozen solid, and you have to chip carefully to avoid damaging the barrel's interior. Get too aggressive and you'll crack the wood, lose all the water, and potentially doom every animal in here. Get too timid and you'll spend an hour on this one task. Your grandmother watches, says nothing, lets you figure out the balance. After 15 minutes, you've cleared the ice and checked the level. Half full. We need snow, she confirms. Bringing snow from outside means carrying buckets of clean snow from a designated clean zone 20 meters from the barn where there's no animal traffic or contamination. 5 trips, each bucket packed with snow that weighs almost nothing because it's just frozen air. Really, you dump each bucket into the secondary barrel inside the barn, where it will slowly melt over the next 12 hours using ambient barn heat. It's inefficient by modern standards. A heated water system would be more logical, but heated systems require electricity, unreliable, fuel, expensive, and maintenance. Good luck repairing plumbing at minus 71 degrees Celsius. The old way works because it's simple, redundant, and requires no technology that can freeze and fail. Next, feeding. Your grandmother leads you to the feed storage area in the barn's northwest corner, where bags and bundles are stacked in organized chaos. Winter feeding is different every month, she explains. December, they need maximum calories with high fat. January, more protein because coldest month, most energy burned. February, we balance because too much fat makes spring transition hard. She pulls down a bag labeled in Saka script you're slowly learning to read. Special winter mix. Inside the bag is a combination that looks like trail mix designed by someone who hates joy. Oats, barley, crushed sunflower seeds, dried fish, yes, fish, horses here eat fish for the omega fats, chunks of rendered fat, dried kelp, salt, and some kind of dark cake your grandmother calls dremi. Fermented grain, she explains. We make in summer, store in cold cellar, feed in winter. Gives them nutrients and helps digestion when eating dry food. It smells vaguely alcoholic, like bread left to rot in beer, but the horses absolutely lose their minds when they smell it approaching. Each horse gets a measured amount poured into individual feed boxes mounted at chest height along the walls. Your grandmother is precise. Kaidelik gets slightly more because she's the lead mare and burns extra calories managing herd dynamics. Sardana gets slightly less because she's young and will overeat if allowed. One older gelding named Borodur gets a special mix with extra fat because he struggles to maintain weight. You must know each animal as individual, your grandmother says. Same food for all is how animals die. The cattle feeding is similar but different. They get hay as the base, pulled from overhead storage in the loft, thrown down in carefully rationed sections, supplemented with the winter grain mix, plus root vegetables from the cellar. You haul up frozen beets and turnips, each one rock hard and requiring an axe to split into manageable chunks. The cattle crunch these frozen vegetables with apparent satisfaction, their powerful jaws making sounds like someone chewing ice cubes. Vegetables give them moisture and vitamins, your grandmother explains. All dried food, they get constipated. Constipated cow in winter can die. Everything is balance. Tiara, the pregnant cow, gets extra attention. Your grandmother checks her visually, running experienced hands over her flanks, feeling for something you can't see. She is good, she concludes. Maybe 3 more weeks, maybe 4. We watch. The casualness with which she discusses delivering a calf in conditions that would horrify any veterinarian is either confidence or fatalism. You're not sure which. The chickens are fed last with cracked corn, wheat, and, bizarrely, dried mealworms your grandmother raises specifically for winter chicken feeding. Chickens need protein and fat even more than large animals, she says. Small bodies, hard to stay warm. These worms keep them laying even in dark months. The chickens descend on the food with surprising aggression, pecking and shoving each other in a hierarchy you're beginning to recognize. The dominant hen, a brown monster your grandmother calls Sasha, eats first, and the others wait their turn. While the animals eat, you and your grandmother perform health checks. This means moving among them, looking at eyes, should be clear, alert. Checking hooves, no cracks, no ice buildup in the frog. Running hands over bodies feeling for injuries or abnormalities. Watching their eating behavior, enthusiastic is good, hesitant is concerning, and checking their waste. Yes, you're examining frozen animal poop. Your grandmother kicks apart horse manure like she's evaluating gemstones. Too dry, needs more water. Good consistency. This one, a little loose. Watch this horse, maybe parasite. You never imagined your life would include frozen poop diagnostics, but here you are. Kaidalik's left rear leg, the one you noticed yesterday, gets special attention. Your grandmother lifts the hoof. She makes it look effortless, but when you try later, the horse doesn't cooperate and examines it closely. Small crack, she announces. From cold. We treat today. The treatment involves a salve she's made from pine tar, beeswax, and something she calls bear fat, though you suspect it might be beef fat because actual bear fat seems logistically complicated. She packs this into the hoof crack, explaining that it will seal the crack, prevent ice infiltration, and help the hoof heal as it grows. In 2 months, this crack grows out, she says. But we watch. Bad hoof can lame a horse. Lame horse in Yakutia often means dead horse. The morning feeding routine takes 2.5 hours. Not because it's complicated, but because everything at -71 degrees Celsius takes 3 times longer than it should. Your hands get cold even through double mittens. You have to warm them against your body every 10 minutes or lose dexterity. Tools must be handled carefully because metal tools at this temperature will instantly freeze to wet skin. Your grandmother shows you scars on her palm where she once grabbed a metal bucket handle with wet gloves. Water spilled on the floor freezes in seconds, creating treacherous ice patches. Even walking between animals requires careful attention because slipping and falling could injure you or spook the animals. By 6:30 a.m., the animals are fed, checked, and settling into their day. The sun won't rise until almost 10 a.m., and even then it'll barely clear the horizon before setting again around 2 p.m. 4 hours of dim twilight is what passes for day in December Yakutia. Your grandmother stands in the barn center, hands on hips, surveying her domain. Good first morning, she says, which you recognize as high praise. Tonight you do midnight check alone. I watch from house. If you fail, animals let me know. You step outside together, and the cold somehow feels colder now that you're sweaty under your layers. Sweat in -71 degrees Celsius is dangerous. It conducts heat away from your body 25 times faster than dry clothing. You need to get inside, strip down, dry off, and warm up before the sweat freezes against your skin. This is why the barn work happens in intense bursts rather than extended sessions. You warm up working, then retreat to warmth before your own body heat becomes a liability. Inside the house, your grandmother has more salamat waiting, plus something that looks suspiciously like fermented mare's milk, kumis, the traditional Yakutian drink that tastes like sour, slightly alcoholic milk and allegedly prevents scurvy. You drink it because refusing would be insulting, and because scurvy prevention is genuinely important when fresh vegetables are a distant summer memory. She also gives you 2 fish oil capsules, modern technology meeting ancient knowledge, and a piece of dark rye bread with butter thick enough to qualify as frosting. Now you rest 2 hours, she commands. Then we process feed for evening. Then you check animals at noon. Then evening feeding at 4 p.m. Then night check at 9 p.m. Then midnight check at midnight. This is every day until April. She says this matter-of-factly, like she's describing a mildly boring Tuesday rather than a grueling 4-month marathon of sleep deprivation and physical labor that would break most people you know. You stumble to your room, set 3 different alarms, and collapse still half-dressed because removing clothes requires energy you don't have. Through the wall, you can hear your grandmother moving around, doing laundry by hand, preparing food, living her life while simultaneously managing a farm that would require 3 people anywhere else. She's 71 years old. You fall asleep wondering if you'll survive this, and if you do, whether you'll recognize yourself on the other side. Kaidalik watches you with those impossibly knowing eyes as you approach with the morning feed, and you're struck by how wrong the word horse feels for what she is. She's not a horse in the way city people imagine horses. No sleek thoroughbred lines, no graceful Arabian arch, no Kentucky Derby fantasy. She's a biological furnace wrapped in fur, wrapped in more fur, engineered by millennia of survival pressure into something that can exist where existence shouldn't be possible. Her coat is so thick you could bury your entire hand in it and not touch skin. In places, the fur grows in whorls and patterns that seem random until your grandmother explains their air-trapping structures, creating micropockets of insulation that make her coat worth more than any synthetic winter gear humanity has invented. Yakutian horses, Saka Ada in the local language, are genetic marvels that historians still argue about. The standard theory is they descended from horses brought by Turkic peoples migrating north, then adapted through brutal natural selection over thousands of years. But there's a fringe theory, championed by some geneticists, that they might represent a separate domestication event, or at least a distinct genetic branch that diverged so early and adapted so dramatically that they're functionally a different subspecies. What's undisputed? These horses can survive on their own, year-round, outside, with no shelter, at temperatures that would kill every other horse breed on Earth within hours. Not that you're keeping them outside, you're not a monster and your grandmother would disown you, but understanding their capabilities helps explain their behavior. Keidelik could, theoretically, kick down the barn door right now and survive the winter grazing on whatever frozen grass she could dig out from under the snow. She doesn't need you. She tolerates you because the barn is easier than wild survival and the food is better. This relationship isn't dog-like devotion. It's a business arrangement where both parties benefit. And if you fail to hold up your end, she has options. Her digestive system is its own kind of miracle. Normal horses can't survive on the low-quality roughage available in Yakutian winters. They need grain supplements, processed feeds, careful nutritional management. Yakutian horses have enlarged cecums, part of their digestive tract, that can extract nutrition from what's essentially frozen straw. They ferment food in their guts more efficiently than other horses, producing more volatile fatty acids that fuel their metabolism. It's essentially built-in food processing technology that turns garbage into gasoline. Your grandmother's grain supplements aren't strictly necessary for survival. They're for maintaining working condition and supporting pregnancy in the mares. Speaking of pregnancy, 4 of your 12 horses are pregnant, due to foal in April and May when temperatures improve to a balmy -20 degrees Celsius. Foaling in extreme cold is another topic your grandmother discusses with terrifying casualness. Mare knows what to do, she says. She lays down. Foal comes. She stands. Foal stands. They both live. Sometimes foal is weak. We bring inside house for 1 week. Usually they are strong. Usually. The word carries the weight of foals that weren't strong, of losses that are considered normal in farming at the edge of survivability. Borodur, the old gelding getting extra rations, is 27 years old, which is ancient for any horse and practically immortal for one living in these conditions. He's thin despite the extra food, his hip bones visible even through his fur, but his eyes are alert and he still dominates several younger horses in the pecking order. Your grandmother is matter-of-fact about his future. Maybe this winter, maybe next winter, he doesn't survive. When horse decides to die, horse dies. We give him good life while he is here. No sentimentality, but also no cruelty. Just acknowledgement that animals age and life ends, and that's part of the contract. The horse's daily routine is minimalist. Eat, rest, maintain body temperature, repeat. They don't exercise in winter like horses in temperate climates. Moving burns calories they can't spare. They stand close together, rotating positions throughout the day so each horse gets time in the warm center and time on the colder edges. It's unconscious cooperation, herd behavior refined over generations. When you watch them long enough, you start to see the social dynamics. Keidelik decides when the rotation happens with subtle ear movements and head positions. Younger horses defer to older ones. There's a clear hierarchy that prevents energy-wasting conflicts. The cattle are a different species of impressive. Your 8 cows are also Yakutian breeds. Smaller than European dairy cattle, stockier, with faces that seem perpetually unimpressed with everything. Where horses are adapted for mobility and grazing, cattle are adapted for pure survival and converting low-quality fodder into meat and milk. Your grandmother milks them twice daily even in winter, though production drops to maybe 2 liters per day combined. Milk in winter is life, she explains. Fat content is higher, nutrition is concentrated. 1 cup of winter milk equals 3 cups of summer milk. Tiara, the pregnant cow, is the barn's princess. She's due in late January, which is apparently the worst possible timing because that's typically the coldest month, when temperatures regularly hit -75 degrees Celsius and sometimes touch -80 degrees Celsius. But cattle, your grandmother explains, don't care about optimal timing. Cow gets pregnant when cow gets pregnant. We deal with result. The gestation period for cattle is about 9 months, which means Tiara was bred in late April when everyone was thinking about spring, not winter births. You suggest artificial insemination with timed breeding windows, and your grandmother gives you a look that could freeze water faster than the ambient temperature. Cattle rumination is fascinating in extreme cold. They're chewing cud almost constantly, and each chewing session generates heat. Not much, maybe 50 watts per cow, but over hours it adds up. They also produce methane, which in normal contexts is an environmental concern, but in your barn is actually a minor heating contribution. The methane dissipates through the ventilation system before reaching dangerous concentrations. But while it's in the barn, it's slightly combustible gas, adding fractional heat to the environment. You're not suggesting anyone heat their barn with cow farts. That's absurd, but in the desperate mathematics of survival, every watt counts. One of the younger cows, a 2-year-old named Kyaniai, has a weird habit of licking the barn's wooden posts. You mention this to your grandmother, concerned about splinters or dental damage. She needs minerals, your grandmother says immediately. Wood contains trace minerals, she instinctively knows. We add more salt block and bone meal to her feed. It's another reminder that these animals are in constant communication with their environment and their bodies, responding to needs you can't perceive. Your job isn't to control them. It's to observe and respond to what they're telling you. The reindeer situation is complicated. You don't have reindeer in your barn. Those belong to your uncle who lives 20 kilometers away and is ethnically even rather than Saka, part of a different indigenous group with different traditions. But your grandmother brings them up constantly because, in her view, reindeer are the ultimate cold-adapted animal and Saka people should learn from them. Reindeer blood doesn't freeze, she says, which sounds like mysticism until you research it later and discover it's biochemically true. Reindeer blood has adapted to remain liquid at temperatures where human blood would crystallize. Something about antifreeze-like proteins and modified cell membranes that scientists are still studying. Reindeer also have hollow fur. Each hair is a tube of air, creating insulation that's so effective they can sleep on ice and snow will pile on their backs without melting. Their noses are specially adapted to warm incoming air before it reaches their lungs, and their hooves change consistency with seasons, becoming harder in winter for breaking through ice-crusted snow. They're basically biological miracles, which is why they've been central to northern indigenous cultures for thousands of years. Your grandmother's subtle point. If your horses and cattle are impressive for surviving here, remember there are animals even more adapted, and those animals are managed by humans who've been doing this longer than Saka people have existed as a distinct group. The chickens are the barn's comic relief and also its most fragile inhabitants. You have 17 hens and 1 rooster living in an elevated coop in the barn's warmest zone. They're not special cold-hardy breeds. They're just chickens whose ancestors got increasingly stubborn about dying. Each hen is a 5-pound bundle of indignation wrapped in feathers, producing maybe 1 egg per week in December despite optimal conditions anywhere else producing 5 or 6 eggs weekly. Their metabolism is working overtime just maintaining body temperature. They're too small to efficiently conserve heat, which is why they cluster together in a pile that looks like a single feathered entity with 36 eyes. Sasha, the dominant hen, rules her flock with authoritarian efficiency. She eats first, roosts in the warmest spot, and pecks any hen who challenges her with enough force to draw blood. Your grandmother watches this approvingly. Strong leader means flock survives, she says. Weak leader, chickens fight constantly, waste energy, die. Sasha is good dictator. You've never heard anyone describe a chicken as a good dictator, but watching the flock dynamics, you understand. There's no democracy in survival situations. Feeding chickens in winter is its own specialty. They need protein, hence the mealworms, but also calcium for egg production, grit for digestion, and fat for energy. Your grandmother's chicken feed is a recipe passed down from her grandmother. Cracked grains, fish meal, powdered eggshells from their own eggs, creating a circular calcium economy, dried insects, and a small amount of rendered fat. Mix it fresh weekly. Store in a sealed container so it doesn't absorb moisture and freeze into a brick. The chickens also get vegetable scraps, though scraps is generous. Everything in winter is precious, so they're getting carefully rationed pieces of turnip and beet tops. The rooster, named Ivan for reasons no one can explain, crows at 8 a.m. regardless of the fact that sunrise is 2 hours later. His internal clock is set to photoperiod cues that no longer match reality, but he doesn't care. Your grandmother says his crowing helps the hens maintain circadian rhythms and encourages laying, which might be true or might be justification for keeping a rooster who contributes nothing else. Either way, Ivan's crow in the frozen darkness is a daily reminder that life persists, which has value beyond egg production. Each species in your barn represents a different evolutionary strategy for surviving extreme cold. Horses, mobility, efficient digestion, social cooperation, thick fur. Cattle, size, rumination, fat reserves, stoic endurance. Chickens, clustering behavior, small group dynamics, metabolic flexibility. And you, the human, technology, planning, intergenerational knowledge transfer, and the ability to light fires and build shelters. You're all in this together. A cross-species survival coalition negotiated daily through feed, water, shelter, and mutual tolerance. There's a moment, usually around noon when you're doing the midday check, when you stand in the barn center and just listen. Horses breathing in rhythm, cattle chewing, chickens murmuring their soft contact calls. The barn itself creaking as logs shift. Wind outside howling like it's personally offended by the building's existence. And underneath it all, a warmth that's not just temperature but something else. The presence of life, concentrated and protected, refusing to yield to an environment that wants everything frozen and still. Kaitalik nuzzles your shoulder again, and you realize she's not asking for food. She's just acknowledging your presence, confirming you're still part of the herd. Among horses, this counts as friendship or at least professional respect. You scratch behind her ear, in the spot your grandmother showed you, and she leans into it with a sigh that fogs the air between you. Good enough. The propane heater dies at 2:17 a.m. on your 8th night, and you don't realize it until 4:45 a.m. when your alarm goes off and the barn thermometer reads -38 degrees Celsius instead of the usual -12 degrees Celsius. Your stomach drops like you've stepped into an elevator shaft. 26 degrees lost in roughly 2.5 hours. The animals are still alive, you can see breath clouds and movement, but Kaitalik is shivering, which horses only do when they're approaching the limits of their thermal regulation. The younger horses are pressed against the older ones in tighter formation than normal. The cattle have huddled into a mass that's less herd behavior and more collective survival strategy. Even Sasha and her chickens have gone silent, conserved into a feathered ball that's ominously still. You actually run, which at -71 degrees Celsius outside is stupid because the cold air sears your lungs. Back to the house, banging on your grandmother's door. She's already up, already dressed, already moving before you finish explaining. Which heater? She asks, pulling on her outer coat. The propane unit on the west wall. She curses in Saka, words you don't know but understand perfectly through tone. That unit is temperamental below -70 degrees Celsius. You should have checked it at midnight. You didn't. You checked the animals, topped off water, and went to bed, assuming technology would behave like technology is supposed to. Back in the barn, she's already examining the heater, headlamp beam cutting through the darkness. It's a small propane unit meant to supplement animal heat during the worst cold snaps, not replace it. But in -71 degrees Celsius conditions, that supplemental heat is the difference between manageable and critical. She opens the access panel, bare hands, which makes you wince, and immediately identifies the problem. Regulator froze, she announces. Ice buildup in the gas line. Propane is liquid now, won't vaporize properly. She shows you ice crystals inside the regulator, delicate and deadly. The fix is absurdly dangerous by modern safety standards. She disconnects the frozen regulator, brings it inside her coat to warm against her body, and sends you to get the backup regulator from the storage shed. The storage shed is 40 meters away, unheated, where replacement parts are kept at ambient temperature because storing them warm means they'll shock freeze when installed anyway. You navigate by headlamp through snow that squeaks like dying mice, find the shed's door frozen shut, kick it 3 times before it opens, locate the regulator on a shelf organized with military precision, and walk back. Your grandmother has the system disconnected. She takes the backup regulator, checks it visually, and installs it with the confidence of someone who's done this in worse conditions. Now we purge the line, she says, opening the propane tank valve slightly. Gas hisses, and she immediately lights it with a long match, creating a brief fireball that makes you yelp. Air in line would create explosion later, she explains casually, like she didn't just deliberately ignite flammable gas in a wooden barn. Small fire now prevents big fire later. Your grandfather taught me this after small fire taught him. The heater roars to life, its burner glowing orange in the darkness. Immediate relief is impossible. The barn won't warm quickly, but the temperature drop halts. Your grandmother isn't satisfied. This is patch, not solution. Regulator will freeze again tomorrow, maybe next day. We need different approach. She thinks for 30 seconds. Then, we bring second heater from my house. We run both heaters at lower output, reduces strain on any single component. And you check both every 3 hours, not just animals. Moving a heater in minus 71 degrees Celsius is an adventure in creative problem solving. The unit weighs maybe 15 kilograms, but carrying it outside means the metal will supercool, making it dangerous to touch even through gloves. Your grandmother wraps it in blankets, places it on a sled, an actual wooden sled that's apparently kept for exactly this purpose, and you drag it from house to barn like you're in some frozen dystopian version of a home improvement show. Installation takes an hour because the propane connections are stiff, the fittings resist threading, and every adjustment requires removing mittens for 30-second intervals followed by 2 minutes of hand warming. By 7 a.m., both heaters are running, the barn temperature has climbed back to minus 15 degrees Celsius, and the animals are visibly relaxing. Keidelik stops shivering. The cattle separate slightly, no longer in emergency huddle mode. The chickens start their morning murmuring, discussing whatever chickens discuss when they've survived another night. Your grandmother checks each animal individually, looking for cold damage. Frostbitten ears, ice-burned skin, respiratory distress. She finds nothing critical, which is either luck or the animal's incredible hardiness. Probably both. Equipment failure in winter is not if, is when, she says as you're both catching your breath. Drinking tea she's poured from a thermos she brought from the house. Every piece of equipment has temperature limit. Manufacturers say their device works to minus 40 degrees Celsius, maybe minus 50 degrees Celsius. They lie. Or they test in laboratory, not real conditions. Real conditions include wind, humidity, thermal cycling, age, where everything fails. Your job is manage failure, not prevent it. She pulls out a notebook, different from your grandfather's log. This one is hers, and shows you her failure tracking system. Every piece of equipment in the farm is logged. Purchase date, failure dates, conditions at failure, repair or replacement, subsequent performance. The propane regulators, she shows you, fail every 12 to 18 days when temperatures stay below minus 65 degrees Celsius. The barn's thermometer has been replaced 6 times in 40 years. The leather door hinges last about 8 years before brittleness requires replacement. Even the wooden feed buckets have a lifespan, 5 years before cold cracking makes them unusable. This is knowledge you can't buy, can't look up online, can't learn from manuals. It's empirical data gathered through decades of equipment dying at the worst possible moments and someone writing down what happened so future generations could predict and prepare. Your grandmother's notebook is worth more than any engineering degree because it's calibrated to this specific place, these specific conditions, this specific barn with its specific microclimate and usage patterns. The water system fails next 3 days later in a different way. The barrel itself is fine, but the ladle you use to break ice, the one with the wooden handle, splits along a grain line you didn't notice. Not a dramatic failure, just a crack that propagates over several uses until the ladle head separates from the handle mid-scoop and sinks into the water barrel. You try to fish it out, realize the water is deep enough that you can't reach without submerging your arm, and face a decision. Do you drain the entire barrel, losing precious melted water? Try to rig some kind of retrieval tool, or abandon the ladle and use something else? Your grandmother, watching this unfold, lets you struggle for 5 minutes before intervening. There is hook tool in shed, she says. Long handle, curved metal end. Your grandfather made it for exactly this problem. Of course, there's a specialized tool. Of course, your grandfather encountered this exact failure mode and engineered a solution. You retrieve the hook tool, fish out the ladle head in 30 seconds, and learn another lesson. Every obvious problem has been solved before, and the solution is usually in the shed. But here's the deeper issue. You need a replacement ladle immediately. You can't drive to a store. Stores are hours away and might not have appropriate items anyway. You can't order online. Delivery in winter is sporadic at best. You have to make one, which means you need wood for the handle, metal for the scoop, tools to work both materials, and knowledge of how to create something that will survive repeated thermal shock and mechanical stress at extreme temperatures. Your grandmother takes you to her workshop, a separate building you'd barely noticed, assuming it was just storage. Inside is a collection that looks like a museum of hand tools. Saws, chisels, planes, files, metalworking equipment that's probably older than you, and organized chaos that somehow makes perfect sense to her. "We make new ladle," she announces. "I show you once, you make next one alone." The process takes 3 hours. Wood selection. A piece of birch she's been curing for 2 years, dense and dry, grain running straight. She shows you how to check for hidden cracks by tapping with a knuckle and listening for the resonance. Solid wood has a clear tone. Compromised wood sounds dull. Handle shaping is done with a draw knife, removing material in long curls that pile at your feet. She's particular about the handle's cross-section. Oval, not round, because oval provides better grip with mittened hands. The ladle head is cut from sheet metal. She has a stash of metal scraps salvaged from various sources over decades. "Never throw away metal," she says. "Metal is expensive. Delivery is unreliable. Scrap today is tool tomorrow." She traces a pattern, cuts it with metal shears that require surprising arm strength, and shapes it over an anvil using a ball-peen hammer. The hammering is rhythmic, almost meditative, and gradually the flat metal curves into a scoop. She drills holes for rivets, attaches the head to the handle, and tests the assembly by flexing it in multiple directions. "Now, cold test," she says, taking the finished ladle outside. She plunges it into a snowbank, leaves it for 5 minutes, brings it back in, examines the joints. No cracks, no separation. Good enough. Will last 3 years, maybe 4. When it fails, you make another. The casual competence, the assumption that you'll still be here in 4 years making replacement tools, is quietly terrifying and oddly comforting simultaneously. Door latches fail when metal contracts more than wood, creating gaps where components no longer align. Your solution: install leather spacers that compress and expand with temperature changes, maintaining contact pressure across a wider thermal range. Electric fences fail when insulation becomes brittle. Not that you have electric fences for the barn, but the principle matters for understanding material behavior. Rubber gaskets shatter. Plastic anything becomes glass-like and fractures. Even rope changes properties, becoming stiff and uncooperative. The most insidious failure is gradual. Insulation settling. Remember that moss and grass in the wall gaps? It compresses over years, reducing effectiveness incrementally. You don't notice until one winter is suddenly harder than previous winters, and you realize the barn is losing an extra 2 degrees per night. The fix requires partially dismantling walls from inside during winter, carefully so you don't compromise structural integrity, and repacking with fresh insulation. Your grandfather did this every 5 years. You're going to have to do it in about 2 years based on your grandmother's assessment. She shows you the signs. Drafts you can feel with a wet hand held near wall joints. Frost patterns on interior walls indicating cold penetration. Animals clustering more tightly than necessary given the ambient temperature. Building tells you when it needs attention, she says. Most people don't listen. Then they wonder why animals die. The barn is a living system that requires constant maintenance, not a static structure you build once and forget. You experience your first real equipment catastrophe 2 weeks later, when the backup heater's fuel line cracks during a particularly vicious cold snap 77 degrees C outside, minus 18 degrees Celsius inside despite both heaters running. The crack is small, maybe 2 centimeters, but it's spraying propane gas into the barn atmosphere. You smell it before you see it, that distinctive additive odor that means danger. Your training says, evacuate immediately, no open flames, call professionals. Your reality is, you're 500 kilometers from professionals, Evacuating animals in minus 77 degrees Celsius will kill them faster than a potential fire, and you need to fix this now. Your grandmother's solution is terrifying. She shuts off the propane, purges the barn by opening ventilation to maximum, dropping interior temperature immediately, cuts out the cracked section of fuel line with a hacksaw, and splices in a replacement section using compression fittings designed for automotive use because they're the only fittings rated for these temperature extremes. She pressure tests the repair by running soapy water over the joints in minus 77 degrees Celsius, where the soapy water tries to freeze as she's applying it, looking for bubbles that indicate leaks. None appear. She reconnects, restarts the heater, and we're back in business. This repair will last maybe 3 months, she says. Then we replace entire fuel line. But 3 months gets us through worst of winter, which is what matters. It's triage thinking. Not perfect solutions, but adequate solutions that buy time until better solutions are possible. This is survival engineering, where good enough right now beats perfect eventually. You're learning that equipment management in extreme cold is less about preventing failure and more about having redundancy, knowing failure modes, keeping repair materials on hand, and maintaining skills to fix things at 3 a.m. with numb fingers. Your barn has 2 heaters, 1 fails, 1 continues, 3 thermometers, 1 breaks, 2 confirm each other, backup tools for every critical function, and a grandmother who's forgotten more about cold weather problem solving than most engineers learn in a lifetime. But the real lesson, the one that keeps you awake at night, is this: everything that can fail will fail, usually at the worst possible moment, and the animals don't care about your excuses. They just need you to fix it fast enough that they survive. No pressure. The fermented hay smells like someone mixed beer, vinegar, and a barn floor, then left it in the sun for 3 weeks. Except there's no sun in December Yakutia, so this particular batch has been fermenting in your grandmother's root cellar since August, aging like some kind of agricultural wine that absolutely no human would drink. You're standing over a wooden barrel of the stuff, trying not to gag, while your grandmother explains why this rotten, smelling vegetation is actually premium winter feed worth more than fresh hay by weight. Fermentation breaks down cellulose, she says in the patient tone of someone explaining arithmetic to a child, makes nutrients available that animal cannot extract from dry hay alone, also produces B vitamins, supports gut bacteria, improves digestion when everything else they eat is frozen and dead. She plunges her bare hand into the barrel. It's maybe 5 degrees Celsius in the cellar, tropical by local standards, and pulls out a handful of the greenish-brown material. It's wet but not dripping, compressed but not matted, and it steams slightly in the cold air. Smell is strong but good. Bad fermented hay smells like death. This smells like life. You're not convinced life is supposed to smell like this, but the horses disagree with you completely. When you carry a bucket of fermented hay into the barn, they crowd forward with an enthusiasm they never show for regular feed. Kaidalik actually nickers, a sound you've heard maybe 3 times total, and several horses try to stick their noses directly into the bucket before you can distribute it. The cattle are similarly interested, though with the dignified restraint cattle maintain even when excited. Only the chickens are ambivalent, but chickens are ambivalent about everything except mealworms and dominance hierarchies. Your grandmother's fermentation system is elaborate, built up over decades of trial and error that probably included some disasters she doesn't discuss. She starts in July when the grasses are at peak nutrition, cutting them at a specific growth stage, early enough that they're still vitamin-rich, late enough that they have sufficient sugars for fermentation. The cut grass is wilted for exactly 1 day to reduce moisture content to 50 to 60%, then packed into barrels with salt added at a precise ratio. 2 kilograms of salt per 100 kilograms of grass. Salt controls fermentation, she explains. Too little, grass rots. Too much, fermentation won't start. This ratio was discovered by my grandmother's grandmother before anyone understood bacteria and chemistry. The barrels are sealed with wooden lids weighted with stones, creating anaerobic conditions where beneficial bacteria thrive and harmful bacteria die. The fermentation takes 6 to 8 weeks, during which the barrels must be monitored for temperature, should feel slightly warm, smell, should transition from fresh grass to sour but pleasant, and structural integrity. Occasionally barrels leak or even explode from gas buildup if something goes wrong. She has 20 barrels in the root cellar, each one labeled with cryptic markings you're learning to decode. Harvest date, grass source, different meadows produce different fermentation profiles, salt ratio variations, she experiments constantly, and quality ratings based on smell, texture, and how the animals responded to previous batches. Some barrels are marked with red paint, indicating they're experimental batches that might be fed carefully in small amounts, or might be discarded if they went wrong. Never feed questionable fermented hay to pregnant animals, she warns. Bad fermentation can cause miscarriage or worse. The science behind this is actually solid, though your grandmother learned it through observation rather than textbooks. Lactic acid bacteria, the same microorganisms that make yogurt and kimchi, dominate properly fermented hay, producing lactic acid that lowers pH and preserves nutrients. This is essentially silage, the same technology industrial agriculture uses, except your grandmother is doing it in wooden barrels with hand tools and inherited knowledge instead of plastic wrap and tractors. The result is probably less consistent than industrial silage but adapted to local conditions and local animal populations in ways industrial agriculture can't match. She also makes something she calls kumel, which is fermented fish mixed with grains, fed to horses in small amounts for protein and omega fatty acids. The fish are caught in summer from nearby rivers, dried, then rehydrated and mixed with barley, oats, and something she won't specify. Possibly molasses, possibly her own invention. The mixture ferments for 3 weeks, resulting in a paste that looks and smells like the worst cat food imaginable, but which the horses eat with disturbing enthusiasm. Your grandfather said I was crazy making fish feed for horses, she says, grinning. Then his horses survived 3 winters when neighbors' horses died. Now everyone asks for recipe. I don't share. The dung-based heating system she mentioned before is also more sophisticated than it initially sounded. Yes, there's dried animal manure mixed into the barn's wall insulation, but that's passive insulation, not heating. The active system involves collecting fresh manure, mixing it with straw in specific ratios, and piling it in a composting area just outside the barn. The composting process generates heat, biological heat from bacterial decomposition, and this heat radiates into the barn's floor area through careful positioning of the compost pile against the barn's south wall. Composting manure can reach 60 degrees Celsius internal temperature, even when air is minus 70 degrees Celsius, your grandmother explains. This heat radiates through wall, creates warm zone for animals near that wall. Also, compost doesn't freeze, so in spring it's ready for garden immediately. She monitors the compost pile weekly, turning it with a pitchfork when necessary to maintain decomposition, adding straw when it's too wet, adding water, actually snow, when it's too dry. The pile steams in the cold air, a visible reminder that biological processes continue even when the universe seems determined to freeze everything solid. The bone meal she adds to feed is made from, obviously, bones, collected year-round and processed in summer when working outside is possible. Cattle bones, horse bones from animals that died natural deaths, fish bones, even chicken bones are saved, dried, and then, well, this is where it gets medieval. Your grandmother has a mechanical grinder, hand-cranked, bolted to a workbench in her workshop. She feeds dried bones into this grinder, crushing them into powder over hours of tedious labor that apparently can't be delegated because the consistency matters and only experience tells you when it's right. Bone meal provides calcium and phosphorus, she says, showing you a jar of the gray-white powder. Critical for pregnant animals, growing animals, egg production, hoof health, bone strength. Commercial bone meal is fine but expensive and delivery is unreliable. Homemade is free except for labor, and labor is something we have. The powder is added to feed in small amounts. Too much can cause digestive issues, and apparently makes a noticeable difference in animal health, though you're taking her word for it since you lack decades of comparative observation. She also collects urine, specifically horse and cattle urine, captured in collection trays under specific animals and stored in barrels in the cellar. You're almost afraid to ask why, but she explains before you work up the courage. Urine contains nitrogen and minerals. We use small amounts in compost to accelerate decomposition and enrich final fertilizer. Also, in extreme emergency, can be used as salt source for animals if we run out of rock salt and cannot get delivery. The thought of emergency urine salt supplementation is so dystopian you can't even process it. But she's dead serious. Has not been necessary in 40 years, she adds. But 41 years ago was necessary. So we collect just in case. The herbal supplements are where traditional knowledge and modern skepticism collide uncomfortably. Your grandmother has dried herbs hanging in bunches throughout the cellar. Willow bark, birch leaves, pine needles, various flowers and roots you can't identify. She makes teas and infusions that get added to animal water or mixed into feed for specific purposes. Willow bark is anti-inflammatory, she says, good for horses with joint pain. Pine needles are vitamin C, preventing scurvy in chickens. One unidentified root is for digestion and another is for strength. And you're not sure if these are genuine folk remedies with actual pharmacological effects or placebo treatments that happen to correlate with animals getting better because most sick animals recover on their own. But then she shows you her notes, and you're less skeptical. She's been tracking which animals get which supplements under what conditions with what outcomes for over 40 years. The willow bark treatment shows statistically significant improvement in horses showing lameness. Not perfect, but better than no treatment. The pine needle supplement correlates with reduced respiratory issues in chickens during the darkest months. Some supplements show no clear benefit and she stopped using them. Others show marginal benefits that might be worth the effort, might not be, and she uses them inconsistently. It's folk science becoming actual science through meticulous observation, conducted without formal training but with genuine rigor. Modern veterinary medicine is good, she says when you gently probe about whether she's considered consulting actual vets. When veterinary is available. But vet is 4 hours away, costs money we sometimes don't have, and cannot come in worst weather when animals most need help. So we learn to help ourselves using what we have. There's no resentment in her voice, just pragmatism. This is the reality of remote farming. Self-sufficiency isn't a lifestyle choice, it's survival necessity. The balance between traditional and modern is everywhere in how she manages the farm. She uses a digital thermometer when batteries work, but trusts her analog backup more. She has a solar panel charging system for small electronics, but relies primarily on kerosene lamps because they're more reliable. She'll accept advice from internet farming forums, but filters it through decades of local knowledge because what works in Nebraska or Scotland or New Zealand probably won't work unchanged in Yakutia. She's not opposed to progress. She's just learned that progress has to prove itself superior to tradition under local conditions before she'll fully adopt it. You watch her prepare evening feed one night, and it's like watching a chemist compound medicine. Measuring fermented hay by weight using a hand balance scale, adding specific amounts of grain mix, adjusting proportions for individual animals based on recent behavior and body condition, mixing in supplements for those who need them, warming water to specific temperatures depending on which animal will drink it. The precision is unexpected. You'd assumed farm feeding was just give them food and water, but it's actually give this specific animal this specific amount of these specific feeds prepared in this specific way at this specific time. Every animal is individual, she reminds you, probably the 20th time she's said this. Same feed for all is how lazy people farm and how animals die. She's particularly attentive to the pregnant horses and Tiara the pregnant cow, checking their body condition daily, adjusting their feed to maintain optimal weight. Not too thin, which risks the baby's development, not too fat, which complicates delivery. The balance is precarious and her only diagnostic tools are her hands, her eyes, and 4 decades of experience. The cultural knowledge transfer happens in fragments, stories embedded in instructions. She mentions her grandmother, who survived the famines of the 1930s by keeping animals alive when crops failed. She references her mother, who developed the fish fermentation technique during a winter when grain shipments didn't arrive. She talks about your grandfather, who improved the barn's insulation system after losing animals in an especially brutal cold snap. Each generation adapted, innovated, and passed forward slightly improved knowledge, a multi-generational collaborative project of survival. You will add your own knowledge, she says one evening matter-of-factly. You will discover something we did not know, or you will improve something we did poorly, or conditions will change and you will adapt. This is how it works. I do not teach you so you can copy exactly what I do. I teach you so you understand why I do it, so you can make smart changes when necessary. It's permission and pressure simultaneously, permission to question and innovate, pressure to be worthy of the inheritance. The barn, the animals, the accumulated knowledge, it's all being entrusted to you with the expectation that you'll maintain it and improve it and pass it forward. No pressure, except literally all the pressure. You're mixing feed one morning, following her recipe but thinking about potential improvements, maybe different fermentation temperatures, maybe different salt ratios, maybe incorporating something you've read about online, and you realize you're doing exactly what she predicted. You're becoming part of the tradition by thinking beyond it, respecting the foundation while imagining the next floor. Kaidelik snorts impatiently, waiting for her fermented hay, and you hurry to deliver it, still thinking, still learning, still becoming whatever you're becoming in this frozen place at the edge of survivability. The silence is what gets to you first. Not the cold, not the darkness, not even the relentless physical labor. It's the silence of being the only human consciousness responsible for 23 living beings in an environment that wants everything dead. You're checking the barn at 11 p.m. on a night when the aurora has gone quiet and the wind has stopped, leaving a soundscape so empty it feels like the universe has been paused. The animals are sleeping or resting, their breathing soft and rhythmic. The thermometer reads -68 degrees Celsius outside, -14 degrees Celsius inside. Everything is fine. Everything is precarious. Everything depends on you not screwing up. Your grandmother has gone to Yakutsk for medical appointments. Nothing serious, she insisted, just old person maintenance, checkups and prescriptions she can only get in the city. She'll be gone 5 days. 5 days during which you are the sole human responsible for every decision, every emergency, every 3 a.m. crisis that might arise. She left you her cell phone number, but cell service is intermittent at best. And even if you could call, what would she do from 400 kilometers away? You're alone in the way that polar explorers and solo sailors understand, functionally isolated with life or death responsibility. The weight of it sits on your chest as you do the evening rounds. Kaidelik is fine. Sardana is fine. Borodur is moving stiffly but eating well. The cattle are fine. Tiara's udder is developing, pregnancy progressing normally. The chickens are asleep in their huddled mass. Both heaters are running. Water is adequate. Feed is prepared for morning. Everything is fine, which means you're just waiting for something to go wrong because something always goes wrong. You return to the house, eat reheated soup that tastes like cardboard because anxiety has murdered your appetite, and try to sleep. Can't sleep. Your brain runs disaster scenarios on loop. Heater failure, animal injury, predator attack, rare but possible. Wolves sometimes approach villages in desperate winters. Fire, your own injury or illness that leaves you unable to care for animals. Ice storm that makes the barn inaccessible. Equipment failure you don't know how to fix. Each scenario branches into sub-scenarios, each more catastrophic than the last, until you're lying in the dark, convinced you're going to accidentally kill everything through incompetence. The statistics don't help. You looked them up before your grandmother left, stupidly thinking information would be comforting. Yakutia has one of the highest suicide rates in Russia, particularly among rural populations during winter months. Social isolation, vitamin D deficiency, extreme cold limiting mobility, alcohol use as self-medication. It's a perfect storm of mental health risk factors. You're not suicidal, not even close, but you understand the vulnerability now in a way you didn't before. The darkness and isolation aren't just unpleasant. They're psychologically corrosive, wearing away at your mental resilience the same way cold wears away at physical resilience. Day 2 alone, you develop a talking habit. Not to yourself, that would be crazy, but to the animals. Morning, Kaidelik. How's the leg? Still good? Excellent. Borodur, you look tired. Buddy. Rough night? Yeah, me too. The horses don't care. But the sound of your own voice is comforting, confirmation that you still exist, that language still works, that reality is proceeding normally. You catch yourself having full conversations with Tiara the cow, discussing her pregnancy like she's a friend at a coffee shop rather than a ruminant who comprehends none of your words. The veterinarian is theoretically on call, theoretically reachable by phone, theoretically able to provide advice even if he can't physically arrive. You call on day 3 because Sardana is acting odd, eating less, standing alone, not participating in the usual herd dynamics. The vet asks diagnostic questions. Temperature? You don't have a thermometer long enough for rectal bovine temperatures. Gum color? You check pink, looks normal. Bowel movements? Normal. Energy level? Subdued but not lethargic. Monitor for 24 hours, he says. Could be nothing, could be early colic, could be social stress. Call back if condition worsens. Monitor for 24 hours, which means another day of heightened anxiety. Checking Sardana every 2 hours, watching for deterioration, feeling the weight of potential loss. You're not emotionally attached to these animals, you barely know them, but they represent continuity, your grandfather's legacy, your grandmother's trust in you, and also they're living beings whose suffering would be your direct fault. The responsibility is crushing in a way you didn't anticipate. Back home, when something broke, you called someone. When you didn't know something, you Googled it. Here, you are the someone who gets called, and Google provides information that's often wrong for these specific conditions. Sardana improves by evening, whatever was wrong passes, and she's back to normal by the next morning feeding. The relief is physical, like a weight lifting off your shoulders, followed immediately by the knowledge that this will happen again. Something else will go wrong. Something else will require judgment calls you're not qualified to make. Your grandmother does this constantly, this ongoing triage of animal health, and treats it as routine. For you, it's still terrifying. The isolation affects perception. On day 4, you're convinced one of the chickens is dead. It's lying motionless in the coop, not responding when you approach. You're already planning how to tell your grandmother you killed a chicken through negligence when the chicken suddenly stands up, stretches, and walks away. It was sleeping. That's it. But for 30 seconds, you were in full crisis mode, adrenaline dumping, convinced of failure. The overreaction is embarrassing but also revealing. Your nervous system is running at elevated baseline, interpreting ambiguity as threat, because the consequences of missing an actual problem are too severe. You start to understand why your grandmother is how she is, the gruff efficiency, the emotional distance from individual animals, the focus on systems and routines rather than relationships. It's not coldness. It's sustainable emotional management. If you bond too deeply with each animal, their suffering becomes unbearable and their inevitable deaths are devastating. Better to care about the barn as a collective, the herd as a system, maintaining professional distance that allows you to make hard decisions when necessary. You're not there yet, you're still emotionally invested in each animal's well-being, but you can see the path toward necessary detachment. The darkness compounds everything. With only 4 hours of dim twilight per day, your circadian rhythm is thoroughly confused. You're tired at inappropriate times, wired when you should be sleeping, and your mood oscillates unpredictably. Your grandmother warned you about this, mentioned vitamin D supplements you should be taking, emphasized the importance of maintaining routines even when they feel arbitrary. You're trying, but it's hard to care about routine when the darkness makes every day feel identical. A repeating loop with no variation except which animal seems slightly off today. You video call a friend back home on day 4, desperate for human connection, and immediately regret it. They're complaining about their commute, their coworkers' annoying habits, the restaurant that got their order wrong. Problems that exist in a universe so different from yours they might as well be describing life on Mars. You want to scream, "I'm responsible for keeping 23 animals alive at minus 71 degrees Celsius in the dark, and if I fail they die and it's my fault." But you don't, because explaining would take too long and they wouldn't understand anyway. The conversation leaves you feeling more isolated than before. Historians still argue whether humans are actually adapted to live in places like Yakutia, or whether the indigenous populations represent extreme examples of cultural adaptation compensating for biological limitations. The Saka people have been here for centuries, developing technologies and knowledge systems that make survival possible. But possible doesn't mean natural or easy. Every winter is a negotiation between human ingenuity and environmental hostility, and sometimes the environment wins. Villages get abandoned. Families leave. The population slowly contracts as young people move to cities where survival doesn't require mastery of fermented hay preparation and propane heater repair. You understand the exodus now. This life demands everything: physical strength, technical knowledge, emotional resilience, social isolation tolerance, risk acceptance, and comfort with constant low-level fear. In exchange, you get what? Connection to land? Satisfaction of self-sufficiency? Pride in maintaining tradition? These rewards are real but abstract, hard to weigh against the concrete daily hardships. Your grandmother has these rewards earned over decades, but you're still in the hardship phase with rewards far in the future, if they come at all. Night 5, the last night before your grandmother returns. You're in the barn at midnight doing the final check. Everything is fine. You've made it through 5 days without catastrophe, which feels like significant achievement. The animals are healthy. The equipment is functioning. You've maintained all the routines, followed all the protocols, made reasonable decisions when uncertainty arose. You should feel proud. Instead, you feel exhausted, wrung out, like you've been holding your breath for 5 days and are only now allowing yourself to exhale. Kaidalik approaches and does her shoulder nuzzle thing, which you've learned is her version of checking on herd members. You scratch behind her ear, and she leans into it with that soft horse sigh that might be contentment or might be tolerating your inadequate grooming technique. Either way, it's connection, acknowledgement that you're part of her world now, accepted if not fully trusted. The other horses have noticed this and are becoming less wary, treating you more like a familiar herd presence and less like a potential threat. You've crossed some threshold of acceptance that probably matters more than any human recognition could. Your grandmother returns the next morning while you're doing the 6 a.m. feeding. She appears in the barn doorway without announcement, watches you work for 5 minutes without speaking. Then, animals look good. You did well. For words that carry the weight of her professional assessment, her approval, her recognition that you've proven minimally competent under pressure. You hadn't realized how desperately you needed that validation until receiving it, and the relief is almost overwhelming. She takes over the feeding routine, and you watch her work, noticing details you've been missing. The way she approaches each animal slightly differently based on their personality, the subtle adjustments she makes to feed portions based on observations you didn't consciously register, the efficiency of movements refined over decades. You're still a novice, still learning, still making mistakes. But you survived 5 days alone, kept everything alive, and earned a "you did well" from someone who doesn't give praise lightly. Was I this afraid my first years? You ask her later, over tea in the kitchen. She considers the question seriously. Yes, everyone is afraid. Fear means you understand consequences, which means you pay attention, which means animals survive. People without fear make stupid mistakes because they don't respect what can go wrong. She pauses, then adds, fear decreases with experience, but never disappears completely. 40 years, I still check barn at night because I fear what I might find. Fear is not weakness. Fear is tool for survival. The isolation is a tool too, in its way. It forces self-reliance, develops competence, strips away the comfortable illusions of safety and control that modern life provides. You're learning who you are under pressure, what you're capable of when there's no one to rescue you, how you respond when the only resources available are your own knowledge and judgment. It's uncomfortable knowledge, this glimpse of your capabilities and limitations, but it's real in a way few modern experiences are. You sleep deeply that night, 12 hours straight, exhausted not just physically but emotionally. When you wake, your grandmother is already in the barn doing the morning routine, maintaining the rhythms that have sustained this place through 40 winters. Soon you'll join her, resume your apprenticeship, continue learning the 1,000 small skills that add up to survival. But for now, you lie in bed listening to the wind, knowing everything is fine, knowing tomorrow will bring new challenges, knowing you'll probably handle them adequately if not perfectly, knowing you're becoming someone capable of this life, one frozen day at a time. The first sign of spring is actually a disaster. The temperature climbs to -32 degrees Celsius in mid-March, and within 6 hours the barn's entire carefully calibrated thermal system goes haywire. The animals, adapted to stable deep cold, start overheating. Horses are sweating under their massive winter coats. Cattle are panting, tongues out, looking genuinely distressed. The chickens have spread out across the entire coop instead of huddling, and several are holding their wings away from their bodies trying to cool down. Your thermometer inside the barn reads -2 degrees Celsius, above freezing by 2 degrees, and it feels like you've been transported to a tropical climate. This is worst part of year. your grandmother announces, shutting down both propane heaters and opening ventilation panels you didn't know existed. Animals are still in winter mode, thick coats, high metabolism, adapted for -70 degrees Celsius. Now temperature rises too fast. Their bodies cannot adjust quickly enough. We help them transition or they die from heat stress. Heat stress at -32 degrees Celsius. The absurdity would be funny if the animals weren't genuinely suffering. The first intervention is ventilation, opening every adjustable panel in the barn to create airflow, letting the warm, outside air circulate. This causes the interior temperature to equalize with exterior temperature within an hour, dropping from -2 degrees Celsius back down to -30 degrees Celsius. The animals visibly relax. Kytelic stops sweating. The cattle resume normal breathing. Crisis averted, except this is going to be the pattern for the next 6 weeks. Wild temperature swings as spring slowly, erratically arrives, with each warm spell followed by brutal cold snaps that trap everyone between winter and spring adaptations. The second intervention is water management. Cold-adapted animals suddenly need more water as their metabolisms shift. Your grandmother increases water availability, setting out additional buckets, monitoring consumption. They drink more during transition than in deep winter or summer, she explains. Body is recalibrating everything, needs extra water for temperature regulation. You're now hauling 3 times the snow for melting, making twice as many trips to the clean snow zone, your arms and back protesting the increased workload. The third intervention is feed adjustment, reducing calories because the animals are burning less energy maintaining body temperature, but increasing specific nutrients that support the metabolic transition. Your grandmother's feed ratios shift weekly, sometimes daily, based on temperature forecasts and animal behavior. Too many calories now, they gain too much weight, creates problems later. Too few calories, they don't have energy for transition stress. Balance is different every day. The precision required is exhausting, each feeding requiring calculation and observation rather than routine. The melting snow creates new hazards you didn't anticipate. The barn's exterior, surrounded by snowdrifts all winter, now sits in pools of meltwater that freeze each night and melt each day, creating ice sheets that are treacherous to cross. You fall twice in 1 week, both times while carrying feed buckets, resulting in spectacular crashes that scatter grain across the ice and leave you bruised and humiliated. Your grandmother installs ice grips on your boots, metal cleats that bite into ice, and you wonder why these weren't used all winter. Winter snow is soft, grips unnecessary. Spring ice is hard, grips essential. Different seasons, different tools. The roof becomes a genuine concern as accumulated snow begins melting. Your barn has approximately 2 meters of snow on the roof, representing several tons of weight that was stable when frozen but becomes problematic when wet. Wet snow is heavier than dry snow, and the roof structure that handled 2 meters of powder might not handle 1 meter of saturated slush. Your grandmother has you climb up. Terrifying experience involving a ladder that flexes alarmingly. To shovel snow off the roof in sections, working from edges toward center, being careful not to damage the birch bark layer underneath. The view from the roof is staggering. You can see the entire valley, white in every direction, with the village visible as a small cluster of buildings 3 kilometers away. Smoke rises from chimneys in the cold air, straight vertical columns that indicate no wind. The sun, actually visible now for nearly 8 hours per day, hangs low on the horizon, pale and cold, but its light transforms the landscape from absolute darkness to something almost beautiful. You understand why people stay here in this moment. The harshness has context now, set against grandeur that no photograph could capture. But you can't appreciate beauty while shoveling snow off a roof in -28 degrees Celsius. So you get back to work, tossing shovel loads of snow down to the ground where they land with soft whumps. It takes 3 hours to clear the roof adequately, and by the end your shoulders are screaming and your hands are numb despite insulated gloves. Your grandmother inspects your work from the ground, pronounces it acceptable, and mentions you'll need to do this again in 2 weeks when more snow melts. Fantastic. The animals' coats begin shedding in response to increasing daylight, not temperature. Their photoperiod receptors trigger hormonal changes that initiate fur loss even though it's still brutally cold. Horses start looking patchy, clumps of winter coat falling out to reveal shorter summer coat underneath. This is apparently normal but looks diseased, like they're suffering from mange or some terrible skin condition. You check with your grandmother the first time you notice it, and she laughs. Every spring, new farmers panic about fur loss. Old farmers collect the fur for spinning. Spinning? She shows you. Massive bags of collected horse fur, accumulated over previous springs, stored in the shed. The fur can be spun into yarn, woven into fabric, used for insulation, even felted into slippers and hats. Nothing is wasted. The winter coats that protected the horses become materials for protecting humans. Your grandmother doesn't personally spin. Her hands are too arthritic. But women in the village trade for horse fur, bringing preserved fish or vegetables or labor in exchange. An informal economy you were completely unaware of, operating beneath the surface of visible commerce. The cattle shed less dramatically but produce massive quantities of loose hair that gets everywhere. In the feed, in the water, in your clothes, in your mouth when you're breathing near them. You're constantly pulling cattle hair out of your food and wondering how industrial farms handle this. Before remembering industrial farms probably just accept cattle hair contamination as normal. Your grandmother is unbothered, mentions that a little hair never killed anyone, and continues eating soup that definitely has at least 3 cattle hairs floating in it. Tiara goes into labor on March 24th at 3 a.m., because of course she does. You wake to your grandmother banging on your door. Cow is calving, come now. You dress in layers that are too light for minus 45 degrees Celsius. Temperature dropped again overnight, and run to the barn where Tiara is lying on her side, breathing heavily, clearly in active labor. Your grandmother is already there, having apparently developed psychic knowledge of impending births, watching with the intense focus of a surgeon. First calf? You ask, unsure of Tiara's history. Second, first birth went well, this should also go well, but we watch. She positions a kerosene lamp for better visibility and settles in to observe. Cattle labor can take hours, she explains, and intervention is only necessary if something goes wrong. Breech position, stuck calf, exhausted mother. Cow knows what to do. We are backup, not primary. You watch, fascinated and slightly horrified, as Tiara contracts, pushes, rests, repeats. The other cattle have given her space, standing in a loose semicircle at respectful distance, watching with what might be concern or might be simple curiosity. The horses are also watching, though with less interest. Horses and cattle have separate social structures and apparently limited cross-species empathy. The chickens couldn't care less and are sleeping in their usual feathered pile. The calves' feet appear first, good sign, front feet, normal presentation, followed eventually by a nose, then a head, then shoulders, and then with one massive contraction the entire calf slides out in a rush of fluid that steams in the cold air. Tiara immediately stands. Surprising speed for an animal that just gave birth. Turns around and begins licking her calf vigorously, cleaning the birth membranes, stimulating breathing and circulation. The calf is alive, moving, attempting to figure out what legs are and how they work. Female calf, your grandmother observes. Good. We keep for breeding. The calf is wobbling, trying to stand, failing, trying again with the determination of a drunk person attempting sobriety. After maybe 10 minutes of attempts, she achieves standing position, legs splayed wide for balance, shaking but upright. Tiara continues licking, making low mooing sounds that might be encouragement or instructions or simple bonding vocalizations. The calf needs to nurse within a few hours to receive colostrum, first milk rich in antibodies essential for immune system development. You watch, anxious, as the calf wobbles around trying to find the udder, clearly motivated by instinct but confused about execution. She tries nursing Tiara's leg. She tries nursing the air. She finally, accidentally, finds an actual teat and begins sucking. Success. Crisis averted. You realize you've been holding your breath. Now we monitor for 24 hours, your grandmother says. Make sure calf continues nursing. Make sure Tiara allows nursing. Make sure no complications. She sets up a watch schedule. You take shifts, she takes shifts, one person always awake and checking on the new mother and calf every hour. Sleep deprivation you thought was ending with winter's worst cold is apparently continuing into spring for different reasons. The calf, Your grandmother names her Aikal, which means hope in Saka, is adorable in the way baby animals universally are, all legs and wobbliness and giant eyes. You're trying not to get attached, remembering your grandmother's warnings about emotional distance. But it's difficult when Aikal decides you're interesting and starts following you around the barn whenever you're working. Tiara is tolerant of your presence near her calf, which your grandmother says is good. Some first-time mothers are aggressive toward anyone approaching their babies. The temperature swings continue, minus 45 degrees Celsius one day, minus 25 degrees Celsius the next, back down to minus 50 degrees Celsius for 3 days, up to minus 20 degrees Celsius again. The animals are stressed, their bodies unable to fully commit to either winter or spring adaptations. Shedding continues in fits and starts. Water consumption fluctuates wildly. The barn temperature becomes impossible to regulate. Too cold with no heaters running, too hot with even one heater on low. You're constantly adjusting ventilation, monitoring animals for heat or cold stress, feeling like you're managing a spacecraft life support system rather than a barn. The mud begins in early April. As the snow melts, the barn's floor, frozen solid all winter, starts thawing from underneath due to geothermal heat that's been blocked by permafrost. The result is mud, deep sticky mud that makes walking difficult and creates hygiene nightmares. Manure that was freezing solid and staying clean all winter is now mixing with mud, creating a contaminated slurry that gets on animals, on equipment, on you. Your boots accumulate kilograms of mud with each step, and you're constantly scraping them clean just to maintain mobility. This is why spring is worst season, your grandmother says, watching you struggle through the mud during evening feeding. Winter is hard but clean. Summer is warm. Spring is cold and wet and mud and stress. Everything is dying or being born or confused about which season it is. Most animals die in spring, not winter. Most farmers quit in spring, not winter. Spring breaks people. But spring also brings hope, actual, visible hope in the form of returning birds. The first raven appears in mid-April, circling the barn, croaking its harsh territorial call. Ravens don't migrate, exactly, but they move to lower elevations or more sheltered areas during the worst cold, returning when temperatures improve. Your grandmother tosses the ravens some meat scraps. Apparently she feeds them deliberately, and mentions they serve as early warning systems for predators and weather changes. Ravens are smart. Ravens know things before humans know. We stay friends with ravens. The sun is now visible for 14 hours a day, rising earlier and setting later each week, the progression towards summer solstice underway. The light is psychologically transformative. You didn't realize how much the darkness was affecting you until it lifted. Your mood improves. Your energy increases. Tasks that felt overwhelming in January feel manageable in April. The seasonal affective disorder you didn't know you had dissolves with increasing photons, and you understand why cultures in extreme latitudes celebrate spring with such intensity. Kaitalik and 3 other maras are visibly pregnant now, their bellies distended, their movements careful. Foaling will happen in late April and May, another wave of births requiring vigilance and luck. Your grandmother is already preparing, setting aside emergency supplies, reviewing foaling protocols, checking her notes from previous years. Horse birth is usually faster than cattle, she explains, but also riskier. Foal can die quickly if anything goes wrong. We are ready. You stand outside one evening in late April, temperature a balmy minus 15 degrees Celsius, sun still visible at 8 p.m., and realize you've survived. Survived winter, survived isolation, survived the responsibility, survived your own incompetence and fear. The animals are alive, healthy, transitioning toward summer. The barn is intact. You're still here, still learning, still becoming whatever you're becoming. Spring isn't the end. There's summer work ahead, then autumn preparation, then winter again in an eternal cycle. But spring is a milestone, proof that survival is possible, that you're possibly capable of this impossible life. Kaitalik appears beside you, her belly round with impending foaling, and rests her head on your shoulder in what you've learned is horse language for contentment or at least tolerance. You stand together watching the sun not quite set on the horizon, 2 mammals surviving another rotation around the sun at the edge of habitability. Good horse, you say quietly. She doesn't disagree. The question nobody asks but everyone wonders. Why? Why endure this? Why stay in a place where winter tries to kill you for 8 months? Where spring is mud and stress? Where the nearest hospital is hours away and might be unreachable? Where keeping animals alive requires constant vigilance and backbreaking labor? Why not move to Yakutsk or Moscow, or literally anywhere else where survival isn't a daily negotiation? You ask your grandmother this one evening in late May, when the temperature has finally, legitimately climbed above freezing and stayed there for 3 consecutive days. She's quiet for a long time, long enough that you think maybe she didn't hear or doesn't want to answer. Then, why do you think we stay? Not answering, deflecting the question back to you, which is very her. You think about it, trying to articulate something that's been forming in your mind over the past months. Because leaving would mean the end of something, you say slowly. This barn, these animals, this knowledge, if you leave, it disappears. Nobody else knows how to do what you do here. She nods, but says, that is true, but not complete truth. Yes, knowledge would be lost. Yes, this way of life would end. But there are other reasons, deeper reasons, harder to explain. She pauses, searching for words. This place is hard, yes, but this hardness makes life clear, simple. In city, there are 1,000 choices every day, 1,000 distractions, 1,000 ways to waste time and not know what matters. Here, what matters is obvious. Keep animals alive, keep self alive, maintain shelter, prepare for winter. Purpose is clear. This clarity is gift, even when gift is heavy. The economics are brutal but straightforward. Your grandmother's annual income from the farm is maybe 180,000 rubles, about $2,000 at current exchange rates, though the ruble fluctuates wildly. This comes from selling milk, eggs, occasional horses to other farmers, wool and fur to village crafters, and a small government subsidy for traditional farming. It's poverty-level income by any objective measure. Barely enough to cover fuel, equipment replacement, veterinary emergencies, and basic living expenses. She grows most of her own food, root vegetables in summer, preserved in the cellar, and hunts or trades for meat. It's subsistence living, economically precarious, one major crisis away from disaster. But she owns the land outright, inherited through generations, no mortgage, no rent. Her expenses are minimal because she makes or repairs almost everything herself. She has no consumer debt because she doesn't consume, new clothes every few years, electronics only when essential, entertainment budget approximately zero. Her carbon footprint is probably lower than any urban environmentalist despite heating with diesel and propane, simply because she consumes so little overall. The lifestyle is involuntarily sustainable. Sustainable because there's no alternative, no access to the wasteful abundance of modern consumer culture. Compare this to your life before: apartment rent eating half your salary, subscription services, restaurants, transportation costs, the constant treadmill of working to afford the lifestyle that working requires. Your grandmother works equally hard, but her labor directly sustains her life rather than generating currency to exchange for sustenance. There's something clarifying about that directness, even as you recognize it's clarifying because you're young and healthy and romanticizing subsistence living. Ask someone who's sick or injured or elderly without family support whether they appreciate the clarity of rural poverty. Yet people stay. The village has 247 residents, down from 400 in the 1980s, but that's still 247 people choosing this life or unable to leave it or born into it without real choice. Many are indigenous, Saka, even Evenk peoples whose cultural identity is tied to this landscape, whose ancestors have lived here for millennia. Moving to a city means cultural death, separation from language and tradition and land-based knowledge that defines identity. For them, staying isn't economic calculation. It's existential necessity. Others stay because they're trapped by circumstance. Too old to relocate, too poor to afford city housing, too specialized in skills that only matter here. Your grandmother is somewhat in this category. She's 71, her entire skill set is Yakutian subsistence farming, and retraining for urban life is unrealistic. But she also genuinely prefers this life, which complicates the narrative of people trapped in rural poverty. She's choosing this, recognizing its hardships, accepting them as price for benefits she values more than comfort. The younger generation faces different calculus. Most leave for education and never return. Yakutsk has universities, job opportunities, amenities that make life livable without heroic daily effort. Why would someone in their 20s choose frozen barn maintenance over apartment living with central heating and internet and career prospects? Your presence here is anomaly, explicable only by family obligation and maybe quarter-life crisis leading you to seek meaning in extremity. Most young people make more rational choices and leave. This creates a demographic crisis that everyone acknowledges but nobody can solve. Villages are aging, populations declining, traditional knowledge dying with elders who have no successors. The government offers incentives for rural living, subsidies, tax breaks, infrastructure investment, but these don't overcome the fundamental reality that modern life is easier elsewhere. In 2 or 3 generations, places like this might only exist as historical sites and museums, preserved for tourists rather than lived in by communities. Your grandmother talks about this sometimes, matter-of-factly, without sentimentality. When I die, probably you sell farm, she says. Maybe you keep for a few years, but eventually you leave. This is normal. Cannot force someone to stay in hard place. She's not bitter about this projected future. She's realistic. The life she's lived requires specific personality traits, high pain tolerance, comfort with isolation, satisfaction from direct physical labor, preference for simplicity over complexity. And these traits aren't inherited genetically or guaranteed to appear in descendants. But here's the complicated part. After 6 months, you're not certain you'll leave. Something has shifted in you, some recalibration of values that makes your previous life seem hollow. The difficulties here are real difficulties, not manufactured workplace drama or social media anxiety. The achievements are tangible. Animals alive, barn maintained, winter survived. There's no ambiguity about whether your work matters. Your work literally keeps living beings alive. This certainty, this clarity of purpose, is addictive in ways you didn't anticipate. You're also learning skills that seem increasingly relevant as climate change destabilizes global systems. Food production, water management, cold weather survival, equipment repair, self-reliance. These are hedge against collapse skills, valuable if modern infrastructure ever fails. You're not full doomer prepper, but the competence you're developing feels like insurance against uncertain futures. Your urban friends are learning to optimize their LinkedIn profiles. You're learning to deliver calves in sub-zero temperatures. Which skill set proves more valuable depends on which future manifests. There's also the community, small but genuine. Village life means everyone knows everyone, for better and worse. Your struggles with barn maintenance are known and discussed and result in neighbors stopping by with advice or loan tools or criticism delivered with varying degrees of gentleness. This lack of anonymity is suffocating sometimes. You can't fail privately, can't have bad days without everyone knowing. But it's also safety net. When you were sick with flu in April, 3 neighbors brought food without being asked. Try getting that from apartment neighbors who don't know your name. The land itself exerts pull that's hard to articulate. The valley in summer, you're seeing it now in late May, is heartbreakingly beautiful. Endless taiga forest, rivers that run clear and cold, meadows exploding with wildflowers that bloom frantically during the short growing season. The midnight sun creates surreal twilights where day and night blur together. Wildlife appears. Elk, brown bears, foxes, eagles. The same landscape that tried to freeze you to death in winter is abundant and alive in summer, generous after months of deprivation. You understand, finally, the rhythm that indigenous peoples have always known. This place gives and takes in cycles, and survival means respecting both phases. Winter's harshness makes summer's abundance meaningful. Summer's bounty must be saved and stored because winter is inevitable. There's no dominance over nature here, no illusion of control, only partnership, negotiation, constant adaptation to conditions beyond human control. This relationship, this humility, feels spiritually significant in ways you're still processing. Kaitalik foaled 2 weeks ago. A healthy colt your grandmother named Kuzgun, meaning raven. The birth went smoothly, colt stood within an hour, nursed successfully, and is now following Kaitalik everywhere learning to be a horse. You were there for the birth, held the lamp while your grandmother monitored progress, felt the awe of new life emerging even as you were exhausted at 2 a.m. These moments, calves born, foals born, eggs hatching, spring arriving, are affirmation that the struggle has purpose, that the cycle continues, that life persists despite everything. Your grandmother watches you with Kuzgun, watches how you've grown comfortable around the animals, how you've learned their rhythms and needs, how you've developed the 1,000 small competencies that constitute farm management. She doesn't say much. Praise isn't her style, but you catch her nodding occasionally, small gestures of approval that mean more than effusive compliments would. "You will decide," she says one evening, returning to the earlier conversation about staying or leaving. "Cannot decide now. Must do full year, see all seasons, understand all challenges. Then decide. But know this, if you stay for right reasons. Stay because you want this life, not because you feel obligated. Obligation makes people bitter. Choice makes people strong. It's permission to leave without guilt, but also challenge to examine your motivations deeply before committing." You're thinking about this as you do evening rounds in late May. Barn doors open to warm air that smells like grass and earth. Animals relaxed and healthy. The light golden at 9 p.m. because the sun barely sets. Kaitalik and Kuzgun are by the water trough, the colt nursing while Kaitalik drinks. Tiara and Eichel are resting near the south wall. The chickens are outside for the first time since September, scratching in actual dirt, expressing chicken joy through frantic ground pecking. Everything is alive. Everything survived. The work ahead is different but no less demanding. Summer pasture management, hay harvesting and storage, equipment maintenance, preparing for next winter, which is always coming even when it seems impossible in summer warmth. Then autumn, then winter again, the cycle repeating endlessly until you die or leave or the climate changes enough to render everything irrelevant. But tonight, in this moment, with animals healthy and spring achieved, the future can wait. You close the barn doors, not necessary in summer but habit by now, and walk back to the house where your grandmother has prepared dinner. Fresh vegetables from first greenhouse harvest, preserved fish from last summer, bread she baked this morning, tea that's actually tea without salt for once. You eat together in comfortable silence, the kind of silence that comes from shared exhaustion and shared achievement, from understanding without needing to explain. Outside, the sun hangs on the horizon, neither setting nor rising, suspended in the ambiguous twilight that characterizes Yakutian summer nights. Ravens call to each other in the distance. Wind moves through birch trees that have finally leafed out after months of bare branches. The world is turning, seasons progressing, life continuing its ancient patterns indifferent to human difficulty. You belong here now, whether permanently or temporarily isn't clear yet, but the belonging itself is undeniable. You've earned it through frozen mornings and crisis management and countless small acts of care. The animals know you. The barn knows you. The land knows you. That knowledge, the acknowledgement of your presence by living systems older and more resilient than any human institution, is wealth that can't be measured in currency. Your grandmother catches you staring out the window at the twilight landscape and smiles, rare and genuine. "You see it now," she says, not a question. You nod, still looking outside, seeing beyond the buildings and animals to something larger, something that connects you backward through generations and forward through seasons, something that has no name but feels like purpose, like home, like the answer to questions you didn't know you were asking. The barn waits in the distance, shelter and responsibility, burden and gift, where tomorrow you'll wake before dawn and begin again the ancient work of keeping life alive against the odds. And you realize you wouldn't want to be anywhere else. The morning chores fade into rhythm now, movements automatic and sure. You don't think about each step anymore. Your body knows the dance, hands know the tools, instincts know which animal needs attention before problems become visible. Kaitalik greets you with that familiar nuzzle. Borodor accepts his extra rations without fuss. Little Kuzgun watches with enormous eyes, learning what horses do and how humans fit into that story. The chickens murmur their good morning chorus. Tiara's calf bounces with the boundless energy of young things who've never known hardship. Your grandmother works beside you, slower than 6 months ago, her hands sometimes trembling with arthritis in morning cold that still touches -5 degrees Celsius despite being late spring. But she works steadily, competently, maintaining the standards she's held for 43 years. She trusts you now with decisions she wouldn't have trusted you with in December. When you suggest a different feeding schedule for the pregnant Mares, she considers it seriously instead of dismissing it automatically. You've earned the right to have opinions, to participate in the ongoing innovation that each generation brings. The sun is fully up now, painting everything gold and pink, and you stand together in the barn doorway looking out at the valley you've defended through winter's worst. Smoke rises from village chimneys, other families doing their morning work, other barns opening, other animals being fed. The community of survival, invisible most of the time but present always, connected through shared challenges and shared knowledge. Good morning, your grandmother says quietly, speaking to the land maybe, or the animals, or the day itself. You echo her words, feeling their weight, their simplicity masking profound gratitude for another morning arrived, another cycle completed, another season survived. The barn breathes behind you, its logs settling, animals moving, life continuing in the space your ancestors built and your grandmother maintained and you're learning to preserve. It will stand after you're gone, probably sheltering other animals, other farmers, other desperate humans seeking clarity through hardship. But for now, in this moment, it's yours to tend. And that's enough. That's everything. The darkness outside has deepened now, and wherever you are, whether tucked under warm blankets or watching city lights or listening to rain, you're drifting. The animals in Yakutia are sleeping too, their breath fogging the cold air, their bodies warm and safe despite impossible odds. Kaitalik dreams horse dreams. Little Kuzgun sleeps pressed against his mother. The barn holds them all, as it has for decades, as it will tomorrow. You did well tonight, staying with this story through frozen mornings and equipment failures, through births and near disasters, through the slow transformation of stranger into farmer. The land is harsh, but the lesson is gentle. Persistence matters, care matters, showing up matters. In Yakutia and everywhere else, the work of keeping life alive continues, quiet and essential, mostly unseen but always necessary. Your breathing is slower now, deeper, matching the rhythm of sleeping animals half a world away. The barn is secure. The heaters are functioning. The water won't freeze before morning. Everything that needs protecting is protected, at least for tonight, at least in this moment. That's all any of us ever really have. Sleep now, as the horses sleep, as the land sleeps under stars so bright they seem close enough to touch. Tomorrow begins another day, but tomorrow is not yet here, and tonight you can rest, knowing you've traveled somewhere difficult and beautiful, knowing you've witnessed survival's quiet grace. Sweet dreams, traveler. The barn watches over its own, and you are always welcome in its warmth.